Welcome back to the Blockchain Foundations course. My name is Gerard Deshay. I'm the Executive Director of the Government Blockchain Association. In this module, we'll be talking about a brief history of blockchain. I think this is one of the most important modules in the course because unless you understand the drivers behind why Bitcoin and blockchain kind of came to being, without really understanding what those drivers are, you can't really understand why it's important, what makes it different than, say, just a distributed database technology, and where is it going in the future, right? And so I think understanding the past is critically important. So I'll spend a little bit more time than most people might think that we need, but again, I can't tell you how important I think this is. So let's talk about the first blockchain, or the first concept of blockchain. In 1982, David Chaum proposed a blockchain protocol in his dissertation. And if you think back about what was happening around that time, we were just kind of rolling out the internet. And if you were dealing with a network inside of your company walls, inside of your company, you could trust the computers. But now we're talking about interconnecting with all of these people outside of our company walls, strangers, people that we don't know. So this dissertation that David wrote about was called Computer Systems Established, Maintained, and Trusted by Mutually Suspicious Groups, right? And that was kind of the beginning of where this all started to come from. And in 1991, Scott Sternetta and Stuart Hayward were working together at Bell Labs. And Scott was thinking, as the world was going digital and more records were becoming digital, and knowing that you could make a change to a digital record and nobody would be the wiser, he asked himself, what would it be like to live in a world where you couldn't trust your records? Again, because anybody could make a change to it. So he went to his research partner, Stuart, and he said, listen, let's figure out a way that we can timestamp records so that people can have confidence that this data, that this record is legitimate and it hasn't been tampered with. So they wanted to essentially use timestamps to secure digital records. And quite frankly, they tried to figure it out, and they couldn't do it. Because if Scott and David were going to enter into a record, they would need a third party to validate it. But Scott or David could collude with that third party, so they would need a fourth party to validate that. But the third and the fourth party could collude with Scott or David, and they would need a fifth person. And the problem just went out exponentially. And they said, well, I guess we just can't do it. So they were going to write a paper basically explaining why it couldn't be done. And then Scott Sternetta was having a dinner with his wife, Marcia, at a Friendly's in New Jersey. And the thought hit him. And he said, when enough people are involved in the collusion, it's no longer collusion, it's consensus. And the idea of a consensus of witnesses is what came out of that early work. And since then, lots and lots of people have done different things and put different variations out. But this is really where this whole concept of a consensus of witnesses was instrumental. Now, what David Chaum brought to it was, and Scott and Stuart, was this concept of putting records into a block, right? And having the block essentially come out every certain period of time, and time stamping it, and then using cryptography to link them together. We'll talk in a little bit more detail about how that works a little bit later in the course. And then having a whole group of people sort of witnessing that and keeping their own copy of that database, so that if anybody makes a change to anything, everybody would know, because that person's copy of the database would be different than everybody else's copy. Right? So the term blockchain was not initially used to describe the technology, but there was a patent for it. The first patent was for a sequence of blocks cryptographically secured, so they were connected by cryptography. They were trying to find a way to secure digital records and develop a system that did not require trust. The concept they established was that when enough parties were involved in the collusion, it was no longer collusion, it was consensus. And they no longer needed a central authority, because even one individual could stand up for the truth, collectively they held power that they could never hold individually. So this is really what the whole initial idea was. And the key concepts was when I say that it was these blocks were held together by cryptography. The concept, again, which we're going to explore, we're going to unpack this a little bit later and explain how it really works, is something called a hash function, or it's a one-way hash function, which means we can take any digital information and essentially create like a fingerprint of it, right? Now, you can look at a fingerprint, and the fingerprint can't tell you anything about the height, the weight, the age, the gender, the race of the person who left the fingerprint. But if you have that person's fingerprint, you can validate that the fingerprint you have is the same fingerprint of that person. So if you have a digital document with the fingerprint of it, then you can compare that to that fingerprint on a contract, a record, a statement, and validate that it's the same thing. And that these hashes are one way, which means there's no way you can look at a fingerprint and then reverse engineer information about the person that gave the fingerprint, right? But if you have that person that gave the fingerprint and you have the fingerprint, you can validate that they match. And then the other concept is a chain of hashes. So we can take all of the fingerprints of information, data, documents, put it into a block, and then take a fingerprint of that block and put that into the next block. And then collective witnessing. So those are the key concepts in the initial blockchain. And then what happened in terms of how blockchain became Bitcoin was when Satoshi Nakamoto wrote the Bitcoin white paper, he introduced the concept of a payload, right? And they put the distributed ledger into the block. So now, instead of just being a block with information, fill in the blank, now they said, with Bitcoin, here's what's inside the payload. It is a distributed ledger. It became a record of money transactions. It involved peer-to-peer networking, and it introduced a concept called mining. So that's what the Satoshi white paper introduced. And then later, after Bitcoin, Ethereum came on the scene, and they introduced the concept of taking this blockchain and literally turning it into a distributed computer. And so we now have this concept of a decentralized app, or you'll hear DApps, right? And these essentially are applications that run on multiple computers. It doesn't run on just one computer. Ethereum also introduced the concept of smart contracts, where you can take any business process and literally create code so that when certain triggers are activated, money is sent to different parties. And it introduced the concept of gas or fees as a monetary system other than mining. And then in 2008, the Bitcoin white paper appeared. The author apparently is Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know if this is a person or a group. We don't know if Satoshi Nakamoto is a man, woman, or alien, or any other rare combination. We just don't know. But we do know that much of his work was built on the work that Scott Sternetta and Stuart Haber did. If you look at their 8 references in their Bitcoin white paper, 3 of the 8 references belong to Scott and his research partner, Stuart. So this came out in 2008. Now, what was going on in 2008? Well, it was a giant financial crisis, right? The world's the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression of the 30s, right? We had the subprime mortgage crisis, we had the international banking crisis, the European debt crisis, right? And it was thought that financial institutions were just too big to fail. So the governments just bailed them out, right? And the response was, why are you bailing them out when all of these people on the street have to pay the price? And there was a great social outpouring of animosity and hostility towards large financial institutions, right? The response was, we saw Occupy Wall Street, we saw massive bailouts, we saw just all kinds of social upheaval. And why do we think that this has anything to do with the Bitcoin white paper. If you look at the very first block in the Bitcoin white paper, or sorry, in the Bitcoin blockchain, you'll see a copy of the headlines from, it's either the Times of London or the New York Times. They talk about the bailout of the banks from this. So we highly suspect that this set of turmoil and tension was very influential in the thought process of Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he, she, or they are. So this is a little bit about the white paper. It's very brief. It's only, I think, about 8 pages. So you can feel free to download it and read it. And then what I can't say it started there, but what continued there was a distrust of very large, powerful institutions. And if you look at this graph down here in the middle, right, public trust in government had been declining since about the late 1950s, and it continues. We're not. It's continued for quite a while. And I like this cartoon here, right? I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? Nobody believes that, right? It may be true, but nobody believes it. When we see headlines like 5,300 Wells Fargo employees are fired for creating millions of fake accounts, all of this sort of feeds this distrust for large institutions and government in particular. And that was followed up by a sweeping populist movement globally, right? And in the United States, we saw Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. They both had a populist message, an anti-establishment message. And politically, it was very powerful. It also occurred at the same time that Brexit was occurring, right? Brexit was trying to get out from the control of a larger, more powerful European Union. So all of these forces, right? The distrust of the banks, the distrust of government, the libertarian, anti-establishment movement, right? Occupy Wall Street. All of those things just poured fuel in the fire of this thing called Bitcoin, which essentially was a technology that sits on this thing called blockchain. And so it was in that environment we saw the first cryptocurrency adoption, May 22nd, 2010, I believe. 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 pizzas. Those were some good pizzas. We saw ATMs start to pop up. Different retailers started accepting Bitcoin, and then other tokens like Litecoin and Ethereum and others. And then we saw that Bitcoin wasn't the only cryptocurrency. Others started coming on the market, right? And here's a list. Today there's over 20,000. It's continuing to grow. If you go to CoinMarketCap, you can see a list of many of the cryptocurrencies. There's far more than are on the list, but you can get a good sense for it. And each cryptocurrency is different, right? Some of them are faster. Some of them are have more secure. They all have different parameters. And from all of those different cryptocurrencies and blockchains, we started to see a whole ecosystem develop of applications and organizations like the GBA, exchanges, right, financial services, infrastructure, right. There's a huge ecosystem around that. And over the same period of time, the value of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies just continued to grow. So in 2009, if you had $1, you could either take that dollar, put it under your pillow, or you could use it to buy 500 Bitcoins. By the end of 2020, that same dollar under your pillow would have given you about 83 cents of purchasing power. But those 500 Bitcoins by the end of 2020 would have given you, let's see, 100,000 million, but $9 million worth of purchasing power. Now, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, right? It goes up like crazy, it drops, it stays low for 2 years, and it comes back up. It is volatile. So why do we believe it's always going to go up? Because the alternative right now is fiat currency, and governments cannot control spending. They just can't do it. So there's a lot of different cryptocurrencies. Some are, some you may think are good, some you may think are bad. But this concept of cryptocurrency that's not cannot be manipulated by people, I think at the end of the day, those are going to win out. A lot of this is opinion driven, right? There are other people that think that central bank digital currencies that are controlled by a bank is the way to go. There's a lot of different thoughts about this. So what we're going to try to do throughout the course is let you know what these different things are and then come to your own conclusion. Here's just sort of a little timeline of history up through 2008. Most of the stuff we've already talked about. And then from Bitcoin was the first sort of major blockchain, right? Scott Sternetta and these other folks had put blockchains in place, but it didn't really kind of pick up like Bitcoin did. Bitcoin really just kind of threw it out there, and then Ethereum. It says here's the first fork. Actually, that's not technically not true. Not true. It's a copy of it. So we'll be updating the slides, but essentially Ethereum did come from Bitcoin. It's just not technically a fork. And then we started seeing, in addition to all kinds of different tokens, we started seeing all kinds of different blockchains, right? Some use less energy, some are more decentralized, some are more extensible, some have more features, some are more private, some are less private. Some are, we have these things called privacy coins, right, which are completely anonymous. Some do more transactions per second, some have faster confirmations. A lot of different blockchains because they all have different parameters and are used for different purposes in industries. But there's just been an explosion of both the tokens and the blockchains. And the next set of slides that we'll go through are the benefits of blockchain. So we'll come back and do that next module shortly.